So first of all, thank you, Bath Digital Festival, for having me. And thank you to everyone who has decided to join my talk. Just to let you know, the Q&A is all set up. If you've got any questions, pop them in there, and I will come back to those at the end. So yeah, to get started on my talk, fail fast, learn faster, build a better digital product with user testing. So a little bit about me. I'm a UX strategist at Evident, and Evident, we are a product innovation studio specializing in human-centered design and technology. We create digital experiences that resonate with real people, solve great problems, and help transform and progress businesses. So we tend to focus mainly on kind of app design or software design, with a focus on user experience. So I've got 10 years experience in the kind of digital industry. I first started my career as an intern for Magic Seaweed. So if there's any kind of surfing fans out there, you'll have probably used the Magic Seaweed Surf Forecast app. And then straight from uni, I went to work for a sister company, so Hawkeye Technology. So if there's any football fans, they were the creators of Goal Line Technology. So that was a pretty cool company to go and work for. And then since then, I have worked for a number of different full service digital agencies. But now at Evident, I specialize in product research, user testing, ideation and conceptualization, and work with a team of designers and developers to deliver our products. So starting with a quote, because everybody loves a good quote, people ignore design that ignores people. And that couldn't be more true. So how many times have you downloaded an app and then deleted it a few days later because it just didn't work for you, or you didn't understand how to set it up? How in real life, like how many times have you avoided going to the self-service checkout at the supermarket because chances are you're going to have a problem and have to call assistance anyway? So there's all these kind of real life problems that just don't work for us, so we tend to ignore it. And especially in the digital sector, it's really hard to win trust of users anyway. So you don't want to do the hard part, which is getting somebody to your website or to your app, and then it doesn't quite work for them, so they just get rid of it and move on. It's really hard to win that trust back once it's been lost initially. So we want to make sure that our designs have our real people in mind. An example of this is accessibility. So other than being morally right to make sure that our products that we produce are fully accessible, there's also a financial benefit as well. So there's an online spending power of disabled people of £16 billion per year. It's called the Purple Pound. But 73% of disabled customers experience barriers on sites that they visit. So it's obviously quite a high figure there. So the combined spending power of disabled online shoppers who click away from inaccessible websites is £11.75 billion. So there's a huge opportunity there for people. If you run an e-commerce website, or if you're thinking of selling a product, make sure your website is fully accessible, because this is going to benefit you as a business. Moving on then, so fail fast. What does it actually mean? So fail fast does not mean rushing to deliver the end product immediately. It doesn't mean blowing your budget as soon as possible and just skipping your vital research steps and discovery steps and not validating your ideas. I know if you work for a creative agency, it can be quite challenging sometimes when the client's putting pressure on you to deliver your product as soon as possible, and they need to see something to feel like they're progressing forwards. But don't skip past those kind of really vital early steps. So fail fast actually means, do your research, uncover and solve problems earlier on, continuously challenge ideas, explore potential opportunities, get people looking at your designs sooner rather than later, because an outside perspective is going to be really helpful to gather more insight and validate your ideas and that they're going to work. And then use these results and these insights to inform future design. An example then of where a company could have failed fast is Airbnb. So in 2008, they were created and they didn't get off to the best of starts. People weren't booking places to stay. So they did some research and they uncovered that the reasons people weren't booking their property listings was because the photography was really poor quality. And obviously that's really understandable. The places didn't look very nice, so people aren't going to want to stay there and pay money to stay there. So after doing this initial research, they were like, what can we do? So they employed a professional photographer to go and take some professional photos of some of their best listings. And with that, bookings started to increase, and business started to pick up. It's a really clear example of how they've applied their learnings then from their user research in their first instance. They are now worth, they were worth 38 million in the pre-pandemic valuation. I think they're worth about 18 million now. So they've been quite hard hit by COVID, but I'm sure they will recover. Moving on then, so what is user testing? User testing is a research technique. User testing is evaluating your product by showing it to real users. User testing is highlighting opportunities. And user testing is seeing your product for the very first time. And this one's a really important one because it doesn't matter who you are in your product delivery team, whether you are, the business analyst, whether you're the project manager, whether you're the designer or the developer, you will have some level of backstory to the product that you are designing, whether you were involved right at the beginning or you've only come into the project kind of further down the line. You will have some level of context about what it is that you're trying to do. So one benefit of user testing is you get to see your product through your user's eyes for the very first time. And user testing is not a test. At least it's not for our users. So when you have your participants doing user testing for you, you're not testing them, you're not testing their digital capabilities at all. You're testing how their product works for them. And say, for example, they're not that digital savvy. They might be perhaps slightly older and not that familiar with using apps and things. You're not testing them, you're testing that your product works for them. So how will it help you? First and foremost, it's going to save you time in the long run. So 50% of development time is spent fixing issues that could have been avoided in design. So it's obviously way more difficult to change things once they've already been built in code. So it's 10 times more expensive to fix a problem in development than it is in design. It's much easier to make that design change earlier on before it's gone to development. And it's a lot cheaper as well. And there's, so this is a stat that I found, so 400% potential increase in conversion rates based on feedback. So by doing user testing, you have the option to increase your conversion by 400%. So it's really worth doing. Again, all these stats are referenced if you would like to have a read for yourself. So what does failure look like? I don't really like the word failure. There's no such thing as failure. No products fail. They just perhaps aren't as good as they could be. So there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. It's just finding out that feedback and what you can do with it. So what does success look like instead? It looks something a little bit like this. As creatives, we are all very familiar with this image, I'd imagine. It can be a really bumpy road sometimes to getting a design that you're happy with or releasing a product that you're happy with. We come up against different challenges. But typically throughout this journey, we're always constantly asking, like, what are the goals? What do we want? And how do we want to get there? And eventually we do. So it's really important to ask ourselves when we're doing user testing, what does success look like for our users? Have they enjoyed interacting with our product? Have they achieved their desired goal? Have they had a frictionless experience? Have they completed the required task? And have they fulfilled your desired process? So process is really important that you know yours as an essential for including that in your preparation for your user testing. So that's an example of a process is, for example, as an account holder, I want to cancel my subscription, or as a new customer, I want to subscribe to a newsletter or purchase a product. So it's the kind of end-to-end steps that your user completes to achieve what they want to achieve and what you want them to achieve. So where to start? It's never actually too early to start. You can be talking to friends, you can be speaking with different people, with colleagues, with family, bouncing ideas as early as possible. An example of this is actually Uber. I'm sure we're all probably quite familiar with Uber. The former founder, Travis Kalanick, he actually came up with the idea. He was stuck in traffic in Paris on a really rainy day. He couldn't get a cab, was feeling pretty frustrated. He had an idea for Uber. So he started speaking to friends and family. He would go and talk to strangers at bus stops, people that were, leaving their buildings, their work buildings. He would speak to people queuing up in taxi ranks, and just felt, there's an easier way to do this. What if we could all book a cab from the click of our phone using an app? And that's essentially really early onset user testing. And they've obviously been quite successful. So I think that was a pretty good thing for him to do. So where to start? Speak to people, ask their thoughts and opinions, get their insights. But one thing I will say is know your target audience. It's all very fair and well speaking to a wide range of people because they will offer you some level of value, but don't let the opinion of people who aren't your target market kind of muddy your opinion. Because if they're essentially not the ones that are going to be using the end product, whilst their opinion is valuable, you can kind of push it to the side slightly if they're not your target market. So know your target audience. It's their thoughts and opinions that matter the most. A really good way to do this is to create user personas. Really valuable exercise because typically we all kind of assume that we know our target market, but there's the exercise of kind of writing it down and being really specific, going through kind of their age, their location, their values, their goals, their frustrations, what their occupation is. All of these things can be really helpful to kind of uncovering opportunities and how you can learn to make your product better. And then create your processes, write those down as well. Again, an example I've used here and I used earlier, as an account holder, I want to pause my subscription, but this could also be, I want them to check out using PayPal, or I want them to subscribe to my newsletter, or I want them to upload a video. It could be anything. So fail to prepare, prepare to fail, that kind of age-old adage. Planning is key, and doing the actual testing part is probably the easiest bit, to be honest, once all the preparation has been done. So some things to think about before you start are, so who, when, what, where, how, why. That's quite a few things there, but don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel overwhelmed. We'll go through it all in a second. Excuse me. And remember, 85% of issues related to UX can be detected by performing a usability test on a group of 5 users. So you're better off having 5 really good quality sets of results as opposed to 25 that are really invaluable. So yeah, kind of quality over quantity, and you can still get some really valuable feedback. Starting with the who then, so your participants should align with your user personas. Say, for example, you've got 4 user personas and then you've managed to recruit 20 user testers. Ideally, you would start to align them to your persona. So you would have, say, representation from each. So you'd have 5 of each persona type. And this is just to give a really clear set of results across the board, so you are aware of the challenges faced by each of the different personas. You wouldn't want to just test it with one, because chances are their problem might not be the same as another persona. And the whole reason of doing personas is that you kind of capture your different types of user, and you're getting kind of a broad spectrum there of results. So when to do user testing? Schedule time in your project plan in advance. At the start of any given project, it's really important to schedule it in and make sure that it fits alongside your design deliverables before you enter development. Make it as easy as possible for people to give their time. So give them plenty of notice. If a project's beginning to kick off, drop them an email earlier on. Utilize your network of connections if they are obviously your target market. And yeah, just make it as easy as possible for people to give them their time, give you their time, sorry. So what are you actually testing? Again, this can range from a sketch on a piece of paper is still going to give you some insightful feedback, or perhaps it's low fidelity UX designs or high fidelity UX designs. We've given some little examples across the screen here. We're a huge fan of InVision. It's a really great tool where you can upload your designs direct to that, and then you create hotspots to turn it into a clickable prototype. So it feels very much like a working product, but there's no code required. There's no development required at all. It simply is just different screens. And you can create kind of a web mockup or mobile or tablet mockup as well. So it's a really, really good tool. Highly recommend if you've not used it before. So where are you going to do your user testing? Remote or in person? At the minute, obviously with COVID and everything else, it's a little bit more challenging to do testing in person. We're not really mixing that much right now, which is a shame, but you can do it just as easily remotely as well. Just back to what I was saying about making it as easy as possible for people to participate. Just from experience, we actually did some user testing and we would go to people's offices and sit with them. We would make it super convenient for them. They didn't have to go anywhere. They didn't have to give up more time than was necessary. And we did run a session that was a bit like a hot desk setup. So we went and just sat down in an office block and then spoke to people and said, come on, if you've got 10 minutes, just come and see us. Click through some screens and give us your feedback. Made it super easy for them. But yeah, just typically, obviously now with COVID, doing it remotely, chances are we're going to be using something like Zoom or Skype or Teams or whatever to manage that. So following on from that, so how are you going to do your user testing? So we've got moderated versus unmoderated. Moderated is where you are more likely to do kind of a one-to-one setup with a person. So this might be more kind of interview style. You're going to talk them through it. You're going to brief them properly before they start. You're going to talk them through the whole process and kind of hold their hand throughout. Unmoderated style is where you basically set the test up to work as a standalone, and you could essentially send somebody a link and they would be able to do it by themselves without any support from you, and you'd still get really valuable results from that. And then another method is explorative versus comparative. So explorative is where you'd probably ask more kind of open-ended questions. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Versus comparative, which is where you might have two different designs that solve the same problem. So they do the same thing, but they just look different. They might feel different and require different action from the user. So you would say to them, which one would you prefer? And you might have some more kind of closed questions as well. So the why are you actually doing this? Like what do you want to get from it? So before you start, know your goals and measurement metrics. So how are you going to deem what was successful, what wasn't? How do you want to measure different elements of what you're trying to test? And yeah, what are you trying to get out of it, so that at the end of it, when you've got all your results, it's going to help you do your analysis and wrap up your feedback so that you can deliver it back to the rest of your team. Another example of a tool that we've used that we found really, really good was usertesting.com. It does require a bit of budget for it, but actually it's really valuable. So we, for a project that we ran, in 2 weeks, we were able to get 8 results. We went and did 8 one-to-one interviews, visiting people in their workplace. And obviously over 2 weeks, 8 results we were quite happy with that, to be honest, in the standard working week. But actually we felt, we needed to get more data for what we were doing. So in 30 minutes using usertesting.com, we were actually able to get 49 results. So it's much, much quicker. And if you think, yes, we had to spend money using usertesting.com, but had we actually converted that into our time required to go and visit 49 different people, it was actually way more beneficial. So I'd say regardless of whatever methods you decide to use, whether that's comparative, explorative, or one-to-ones or unmoderated, be consistent. So ensure that every test follows the same structure. And it's important to say it's okay to have a mixture of both. So say, for example, you can get five of your closest network are your target market, they're happy to come and do a one-to-one interview with you, and it could be moderated, that's absolutely fine. And then say, for example, you want to put a link out to somebody, put a link out on your social media to get more people that are your target market, you can set it up in exactly the same way, so that it's structured in the same way and that the results can be combined and compared and analysed in the same form. So what I would say is limit your variables. Again, this links back to our processes that I talked through earlier. Your user test, you want to make the kind of ideal time is between 30 minutes to an hour. So you want to limit your variables so that you're getting really valuable insights and you're not kind of overwhelming your participant by getting them to test too many things at once. So limit your processes, maybe prioritize them. So if you're focusing on converting a customer, selling a product, then obviously the processes required to achieve that are going to be your priority ones. So yeah, keep them kind of structured, limit those, have a structure with your tests, so know exactly how you're going to run those. So I've got participant 1, they align with my user persona, they've got these processes to complete, they're going to run this test, and then they're going to complete a questionnaire, for example. That's just a really loose testing structure. Questions that you want to ask them during that test, that's especially if you're doing a one-to-one kind of moderated call over Zoom or something, it's good to have that structure. But actually, if your user is kind of deviating a little bit from the topic, but it's still really insightful, that's great. That's going to give you more value in the long run. So as long as you're kind of keeping an eye on time and it's all valuable and you're not kind of getting sidetracked, then that's still really beneficial. And record your results in the same way each time. I'm going to talk through this in a second. But my own personal learnings are, in the past, I've recorded results on paper, in Word docs, in online forms. I've had audio recordings, video recordings, and especially when you're trying to get through loads of different user tests in a short space of time, it's quite easy for that to happen. So top tip would be record all the results in the same way each time by using an automated online form tool, which I'll talk through in a sec. So hosting a session. Again, this is probably more related to doing a moderated session. So if this is over Zoom or in person, straight away put your participant at ease. Depending on who your target market is, they might not be very digital. They might never have done anything like this before. They'll be quite unfamiliar with it, and they might be nervous. They might think, what am I going to be doing? Am I going to get it wrong? Again, there's no wrong answer. So provide them with clear instructions. Something that's really helped me is to print it out. So print out print out my list of processes, print out my persona that they're relating to, and have my questions there as well. If you are doing a moderated session, you will want to, ideally you would want to record it. So you would record their screen. If you had the luxury of having a second camera, you'd want to record their facial expressions as well. But some people aren't, they're not necessarily comfortable with that. So always ask permission first. If they don't want to be filmed, but they don't mind their audio being recorded, then that's really good and really helpful. That will give you something to refer back to. But again, if they don't want to, then there's nothing that can be done about that. And hopefully, without that, you'll still be able to take really good notes, and your kind of questionnaire at the end will capture all of their feedback. So yeah, I mentioned before, highlight that there's no wrong answers. You're not testing them, you're testing your product, and keep an eye on time, because you don't want them to feel, overwhelmed. You don't want it to run on for hours and hours and hours. So when you're actually testing your product, so you've got your designs, you really want to avoid bias. And it's really easily done, but especially when we have focused on our designs for a really long time, and we've lived in the project for a really long time, chances are, although we're testing two different things, perhaps we will have a preference. So as a user tester, it's really important that you are super neutral in this and not biased. Just to go through some examples of this. For a project that we delivered called Beacon, we've got a screenshot on the right-hand side. This is just a section taken from the homepage that we had. So browse topics, we've got our four topics along in those kind of card views, but then also you could navigate to that through our discover menu in the top right with a little burger icon. So that was kind of the core of our website. That was our main navigational structure. And it was really interesting to see whether users would scroll down the homepage, click between the topics, or a lot of users would just go straight to the burger menu to see the wider navigation. So as a user tester, if they've gone straight to browse topics, you might say, why did you go to browse topics instead of the discover menu? But actually you're putting emphasis then on browse topics, and it almost sounds a bit accusatory. So instead of saying that, you could say, did you notice if there was another way to navigate to that content? And then you can probe them for more information, saying, what do you think of this approach? And then kind of continue asking those open-ended questions. A second example, on the right-hand side, you'll see a design that we did for an iPad. And this was for use in a laboratory. So it was very kind of icon-driven with lots of data. So instead, when we were doing user testing with people and saying, why did you click on this icon? Again, it sounds a little bit accusatory. It's like, oh, well, they're not supposed to click on the icon. So you can say instead, can you tell me what you think about these icons? What would you expect to happen if you clicked on this icon, and why? Expectancy tests are actually a really good way to get results quickly. If you don't have time to do like a full, really well considered user test, you could do some expectancy tests. So get your designs and say, what would you expect to happen if you clicked on this? What would you expect to happen if you clicked on that? And just to start to really understand how users interact with things that they've never seen for the first time. So the third example, again, going back to our Beacon project example, which was in the first example that I did. On the right-hand side here, you'll see we've got two screenshots of the homepage, exactly the same information, just displayed in a slightly different way. So doing like a comparative test, you might want to say, would you agree that option A is better than option B? But again, by putting option A first, you're indicating that option A is the better option. So you're putting bias on the question. So a better way to ask that would be, which of these two approaches did you find better and why? So recording your results. I touched loosely on this earlier about being consistent with your results. These are three tools that we've used previously: Google Forms, Typeform, and SurveyMonkey. My preference would be Typeform, just because I think it's got some really nice strengths where you can kind of brand your Typeform so that it feels on brand. It doesn't feel like you're using a third-party tool. You can set up all your questions so they can be open-ended. You can use like scales or opinion scales or ratings, etc. So one thing I would say is, whenever you're doing your user testing, even if you think you've asked all the questions in the session with somebody, and you think, oh no, I know that, I've got it on record, or yeah, they answered that question, I'll just refer back to the audio later. You won't want to refer back to that audio later unless you really have to, especially when you're trying to get quite granular detail. So I would always say any test should be finished by either the person you've tested with. You can send them the link and they complete it themselves there and then. I would say ideally it would be completed there and then, because if you allow some time in between, they'll go away, they'll do something else, they'll make a cup of tea, they'll have kind of forgotten a little bit of the detail. So always encourage them to complete it. Again, if you're doing a kind of one-to-one over the phone or whatever, you can do it with them on the call, and they can go through and complete the questions. And by putting all of your results into one Typeform, for example, this tool is going to do all of your heavy lifting for you. So they generate really nice visuals of the results. They do some nice graphs, and they just make it nice and clear and visual so that you can go in and do your analysis and pull your learnings from it really nice and easily. So what sort of data do you want to capture? So you've got qualitative data and quantitative data. So qualitative is kind of more unstructured. You're going to be asking more open-ended questions. You're going to have more like free text fields where you allow your participant to, really go into detail in their own opinion. It's more kind of interview style. And then quantitative data, it's more structured, closed questions. You'll ask for scores or ratings or scales. Did you agree with this, or did you agree with that? It's more sort of survey style, which is perfect if you're short on time, and especially if you're struggling to find participants to do your testing with you. It's really easy to create a form, create them a link to your design, and send them it to do it in their own time. And it's much easier to do some scoring than it is to sit and have to think about writing down your answer, which some people just won't want to do. They won't want to take the time to do it. So present your findings then. So you've done all the challenging part, you've booked in your participants, you've created your tests, you know exactly what you're doing, you've got your processes, you've done the actual test with your people, you've got all of your results. So now what do you do with it? You want to present it back to your team. So you want to present it to your designers, your developers, your business analysts. You want to just get everyone in the widest creative team that's on this project to review what you found. But one thing I would say is keep it short and sweet. As a researcher myself, this stuff's really interesting to me and I want to know the ins and outs, like the more detail, the better. But there's chances are there's members of your team that won't. They'll just want to know the top level learnings and what that means. They'll want to know the actions. A really good way to do this is show, don't tell. So use any kind of visual graphs or charts or something that just displays the data in a really nice way. Quotes are brilliant. They're so helpful, especially when people say exactly what you want them to say. And it proves the point that you're trying to make. On the right-hand side here, we've got a screen grab from some testing that we did again for the Beacon project. It was actually a project due to start, it was piloted in Cornwall, so that's our local result, with a view to be rolled out to other counties at a national level. So that's why we've got the local national split. And then we've got on the right hand side some learnings from this. So we were starting to align similarities between a local opinion versus a national opinion and what that meant for our product. So yeah, quotes, really helpful. Again, if somebody has said something that's really great and you're like, oh, I'll refer to the audio later, write it down there and then, or record the timestamp that they've said it, because you won't want to go back and think, oh God, they said exactly what I wanted them to say, but now I can't find it. So yeah, record it there and then, so you know you can definitely find it later. Again, prioritize your findings. So chances are there'll be processes within your product that you're creating that do have a higher priority. So if there's been loads of feedback about that particular thing, you know, that's going to be the one that you're going to want to prioritize, especially if something, particular group of feedback has caused you to have a massive U-turn, then prioritize that first. And off the back of that, you want to create clear next steps and outline actions. So what does this actually mean? Again, you could get all of this data and be like, that's all very insightful, but we're just going to ignore it. Or you're going to think, okay, that's highlighted some further opportunity, or that's highlighted some problems that we hadn't foreseen. So how can we solve that? How can we resolve it? And what is the next action? So to summarize then, 8 steps to success with user testing. 8 steps to our usability test. So plan the test, recruit your participants, prepare your materials, set up your environment, conduct a pilot. And number 5 for me is the absolute most important thing to take from this, is test your test. Obviously you've done loads of legwork, you've booked in your users, you've got everything ready, and then chances are if you've not tested your test, you might get into the room with that person and fall apart, which you don't want to do. So test it, even if it's with a colleague or a family member, just to make sure that you're fully comfortable with how you're delivering that test with your participant before you get to that point. And then obviously once you're happy with it, you can conduct the test, you can analyze your data, and you can report your results. So implementing user testing, I mentioned it before that, you know, it's never too early to start, and typically it would happen right at the beginning, usually as part of kind of the initial research and discovery phase. Then you can continue that through your UX design phase. So if you want to take like a really iterative approach where your design team might produce a series of screens, you go away and test it, come back with some feedback, they produce some more screens, you go away and test it, and then come back. And then again, UX designs are typically kind of grayscale and more boxes on pages, whereas your UI design is way more visually pleasing. So it's always important to retest once you have your UI designs to make sure you're fully happy. And then typically it would go into development. QA testing here, QA testing is slightly different. That's kind of quality assurance testing, not user testing. So it's slightly different. It's just making sure that it works and does exactly what it says it will do. So once it's deployed and your product's been launched and you're super happy, you can do more user testing again. That's how you're going to continue to develop your product and make it better moving forwards. So once it's been in the public space for a while, again, do your research, get people to test your live product. So it's no longer in design anymore. So it's an actual real life product. So it will feel very different to kind of static designs, and might uncover more opportunity. And you can really learn from those learnings. So perfect is the enemy of done. Just to end, as I wrap this up, just to end on a bit of a quote. So chances are you're never going to feel like your product is ready to show anyone. I know for me personally, I'm really bad at disappearing and working on my own and then being like, okay, I'll show it when it's finished. But in actual fact, a 10-minute conversation with somebody throughout the process would have helped progress it quicker. So perfect is the enemy of done. So even if you feel like your work is not done or is not finished, and it's too soon to get people's eyes on it, chances are it's not, and you're still going to learn something from it. And remember, it's okay to change track. So say, for example, you've gone away, you've done all your user testing, and your feedback just wasn't what you thought it was going to be. You've been really shocked by it. That's actually okay. It's a good thing to learn that right at the beginning than it is, after you've invested X amount of money or spent X amount of budget. Get those learnings early on. So just for some examples, even the big players get this wrong sometimes. YouTube was actually supposed to be a dating website. It was supposed to be a website where people would upload videos to find partners. And essentially they did some further research right at the beginning and said, well, actually the bigger problem here is it's really hard to find video clips and it's really hard to share video via email, which was a need at the time. So why don't we create a video sharing platform instead? And another example is Twitter was actually supposed to be a podcast finder. And Slack, if you're familiar with it, was actually supposed to be a video game. So it's okay to change track and just, listen to your results basically and build a better product. So iterate, test, improve, repeat. Can't stress it enough. Keep speaking with people, keep speaking with your target audience. Obviously don't let it derail you too much, but again, that feedback is going to be insightful. Those learnings are going to be really helpful. And it's never too early or never too late to do that and repeat. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening. I realized I was probably going a million miles an hour through that. I was just slightly conscious of time. But if there's some questions, if you, fire away. If you've got any questions, I'll happily answer them. Cool, all your questions are pinging in now. So Phil, thank you for your question and I think it was a great talk, thank you. So when is it appropriate to use moderated versus unmoderated testing? I would say it's probably down to your product, but it's also down to personal preference as well. Typically in the past, I've done a mixture of both, purely because sometimes getting people to sit with you in a moderated setting where you arrange a call is a bit more challenging, and people, they can't necessarily give their free time during, say, working hours. My previous experience, we were testing specifically with business owners and business directors who, as you can imagine, were very, very busy. So getting them to give up an hour of their working day was really challenging, but actually they were quite happy to complete a user test of an evening. If you sent them a link, you sent them a video to watch that talked through the process, and they had a questionnaire to fill in at the end, unmoderated, then worked really well for that. So I would say it's product dependent, target market dependent, time dependent, because again, unmoderated, if you've got a good social following or you've got a good network on LinkedIn, you can kind of ping out a link, and that's going to be really helpful. Next one to Raina Simpson. Thank you very much for your question. We're a very small team with small user testing budget. Any advice for the most time and cost-effective approach to testing? Again, I would say it's probably going to be an unmoderated test where you can create a series of instructions, perhaps paired with a video and a type form. at the end, and you can package that up and create a link and link it out to people, or perhaps in an email and share it by an email. Anything that doesn't require as much kind of one-on-one time with a person from your team. I would say that's probably the most time efficient, cost effective. Even just a survey, if you don't even have time to put your design to create kind of a design prototype, just a small survey with some screen grabs is going to be really, really helpful. Yes, I will share my slides. Sorry if I was going really fast at the beginning. I will share those. So the best user testing tool I've used is usertesting.com. I mentioned it in the presentation. It's a really great tool. Yes, it is a little bit expensive, but once you get your results in 20 minutes, it's so efficient. And it's really easy to set up. So what that one is you upload your designs, you create some qualifying questions. So for example, back to my other example I used, we were looking at business directors and business owners, but it was for small companies only. So it was for people with less than 250 employees. And so you can ask some qualifying questions like, do you own a business that has more employees than 250? If they say no or yes, then they qualify through and can answer the questions and do your test for you. So they would review your designs that you've uploaded. The whole thing's videoed. They narrate the whole thing, so there's audio for you to listen to. You can create little timestamps in the video for where they've said something really valuable. And yeah, you get all your results at the end. So you get the video recordings and the transcript, and you can set up your questions within the tool as well. So you don't need to point them to a Typeform or a third-party tool. But one thing I would say is if you're doing some in user testing and then some not, make sure that your questions that you ask align, so you can add all your results together at the end. Thank you guys for your nice comments. I would say managing consistency is basically just creating a really clear framework of what you're doing. So you've got your personas, you've got your processes, you've got the same designs that you'll be testing, and you've got the same Typeform or questionnaire at the end. Keep them exactly the same. So you almost create like a little pack, which any member of your team can then go and take to a participant. To keep it consistent, being biased is really hard because different people ask questions in different ways based on their kind of natural style. So one thing I would say is, if you want to be super consistent, then unmoderated might be better for you, purely because moderated, if it's talking to different people, if different people are talking to your participants, it might sway the results ever so slightly, but it shouldn't have too much of an implication. Do we plan on sharing any resources at Evident? Yes, we do. Watch this space. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say, but yes, we will be doing lots in the new year. So watch this space. Testing as a student. So Ruth, your question, testing as a student, great methods, looking at using things like Messenger on Facebook, really good. Some interviews by Messenger and by phone, really great. I appreciate the challenge. Having gone through uni myself and done research projects, it is always hard to get people to give their time. And especially if you don't necessarily have any budget to put towards it either. Incentivizing, again, I didn't mention it in my talk, but incentivizing people to participate is really good, especially if you do have some budget to do it. That could be something like offering a gift voucher or a percentage discount or something, some sort of reward. I appreciate as a student, though, that's not necessarily that easy. I would say utilize your networks, kind of look on LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, joining those is helpful. Chances are people on there are quite happy to be involved. Yeah, those would be my main ones probably. Social media can be brilliant for stuff like this, and speaking in groups or to people. Can you still consider it a valid test? Can you still consider it a valid test if you don't have personas? Yes, absolutely. Goes back to what I was saying about it's great to talk to loads of people. And if it depends if it's relevant for your project, I guess. If your target market's quite broad, then speaking to people and not necessarily having personas to align them to, that's also fine. As long as you're not letting those opinions cause too much distress in that they're not helping you make decisions, they're actually making it worse. It might be that you need to realign what you're doing, and defining those personas will help you do that. Cool. I think I've answered them all. Um, this is really weird doing a talk knowing there's quite a few people on the call and you can't see them or talk to them direct. But thank you all for coming and for listening, and for all of your questions. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. And thank you to BDF for having me.